The twin suns of Raxus Prime beat down on the construction site where engineer Darren Holt knelt, his hands deep in the guts of a malfunctioning terraforming module. Sweat dripped from his brow as he wrestled with a corroded coupling that had no business being this stubborn. Around him, the skeletal frames of future colony buildings cast long shadows across the rust-colored sand. A sharp tug at his boot made Darren pause. He glanced down to find a pair of luminous amber eyes staring back at him. The creature was no larger than a terrier, covered in sleek midnight fur with silver striping along its muscular flanks. Triangular ears sat high on its head, and when it opened its mouth, 3 rows of needle-sharp teeth glinted in the sunlight. "Shoo," Darren muttered, returning to his work. "Go find your mother or whatever apex predator spawned you." The cub, because that's clearly what it was, did not shoo. Instead, it clamped its jaws around the reinforced toe of his work boot and began to shake its head vigorously, growling in a pitch that started menacing and ended adorably squeaky. Darren sighed. 3 months on this planet, and he'd learned that Vraxis Prime's dominant species, the Cathari, were not to be trifled with. 8-foot-tall pack hunters with intelligence that bordered on sapient, they'd killed 2 survey teams before the colony established the current uneasy detente. The adults gave the human settlement a wide berth, and the humans did the same, but apparently, nobody had explained boundaries to the youth. "Kid, I really don't have time for—" Darren's words cut off as the cub released his boot and lunged forward, nipping at his gloved hand. It didn't break skin. The bite was almost gentle, playful even, but instinct took over. Before his rational mind could intervene, Darren's hand shot out and caught the cub by its scruff. The creature yelped in surprise as Darren pulled it close and purely on impulse, the same impulse that had made him roughhouse with his sister's dogs back on Earth, pressed his teeth against the cub's fuzzy ear in a mock bite. The cub went absolutely still. Darren realized what he'd done and immediately released the animal, his heart hammering. "Oh Christ, your mom's going to eat me, isn't she?" The cub sat back on its haunches, staring at him with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. Its head tilted to one side, then the other. Then it did something Darren didn't expect. It crawled forward on its belly and pressed its head against his knee. Darren looked around the empty construction site. "Good, we're good." The cub, Darren decided to call it Core, because it made a sound like that when it purred, stayed with him for the rest of the afternoon. It watched him work with fascination, occasionally batting at falling tools or pouncing on discarded bolts. When Darren took a water break, Core curled up in the shade of the module housing, never taking his eyes off the human. Darren told himself he should report this. Protocol dictated any interaction with indigenous species be logged immediately, but something about the way Core followed him, stayed close, felt different. Personal. As the suns began their descent, Darren packed his tools. "All right, buddy. Time for you to head home. Your pack's probably wondering where you wandered off to," Core whined, a sound that tugged at something in Darren's chest. "Go on, shoo." Darren made a shooing gesture, but his heart wasn't in it. The cub didn't move. Darren started walking back toward the colony perimeter, trying to ignore the soft padding of paws behind him. He made it 50 meters before his conscience, and let's be honest, his loneliness won out. He turned to find Core sitting exactly where Darren had stopped, tail curled around tiny haunches. "One night," Darren said firmly, pointing at the cub. "Then you go back to the wild where you belong." Core's tail began to wag. 1 night became 3. Then a week. Core proved surprisingly well-behaved, never entering the colony proper but always waiting at the perimeter when Darren started his shift. The cub grew rapidly, already the size of a large dog, and Darren found himself sharing his lunch, rations more often than not. He should have known it couldn't. Last, the Cathari hunting party arrived on the 8th day. Darren was calibrating a solar array when he heard the low rumbling growls. He turned to find 5 adult Cathari surrounding his worksite, each one a towering mass of predatory muscle and barely contained violence. Their leader, distinguished by scars across its muzzle and one milky eye, fixed its gaze on Darren with unmistakable hostility. Core, who'd been napping in the shade, immediately jumped to his feet and placed himself between Darren and the adults. The scarred leader's growl deepened. It took a step forward. Core didn't budge. Darren's hand slowly moved toward the emergency beacon on his belt, but he knew help wouldn't arrive in time. His mind raced through everything the xenobiologists had taught them about Cathari behavior. Pack hierarchy, dominance displays, territory. The leader lunged, not at Darren, but at Core. Darren didn't think. He stepped in front of the cub and roared, spreading his arms wide to make himself appear larger. It was absurd. A 180-pound human trying to intimidate an apex predator, but it was all he had. The leader skidded to a halt, surprise flickering across its alien features. Then Darren did something even more insane. He grabbed Core by the scruff, pulled the cub against his side, and bared his teeth at the hunting party. Not in fear. In challenge, the leader's good eye narrowed. It approached slowly, cautiously, until it stood directly before Darren. The human could smell its breath, hot and sharp. Could see his own reflection in that predatory gaze. The Cathari leaned forward and sniffed. It sniffed Darren's shoulder, his neck, and finally it pressed its muzzle against the top of Core's head, where Darren's scent would be. Strongest from a week of casual contact, the leader pulled back and made a sound, a complex vocalization that Darren couldn't begin to interpret. Then it touched its forehead to Darren's. The gesture lasted only a moment. But when the leader stepped back, something had changed. The hostility had evaporated from the hunting party. One by one, each adult approached and repeated the gesture, acknowledging Darren with that same gentle touch. The scarred leader made one final sound, this one almost approving before turning and loping back toward the wilderness. The rest of the pack followed, all except Core. The cub looked up at Darren and made his rumbling purr growl sound. Darren stood there, shaking with adrenaline, trying to process what had just happened. "I think," he said slowly, scratching behind Core's ear, "I just got adopted by aliens." Core's tail wagged enthusiastically. Dr. Sarah Chen, the colony's chief xenobiologist, listened to Darren's report with increasingly wide eyes. "You bit the cub?" "In jest. It was just playing." "And the pack leader touched foreheads with you?" "I mean, yeah, but..." "Darren," Dr. Chen set down her tablet. "Do you understand what you've done? That's a pack bonding ritual. The bite marked you as family. When you defended the cub, you completed the bond. They recognized you as Core's pack parent." Darren blinked. "So I'm not in trouble?" "Trouble? You idiot, you've just accomplished what 3 years of diplomatic efforts couldn't. You've bridged a species gap through sheer accidental instinct." She laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. Leave it to a human to bite an alien predator and somehow make friends. Through the window of the prefab office, Darren could see Core waiting at the perimeter, patient and loyal. "So," Darren said carefully, "does this mean I can keep him?" Dr. Chen pinched the bridge of her nose. "He's not a pet, Darren. He's family." "There's a difference," Darren grinned. "Good enough for me." As he walked back to his quarters, Core falling into step beside him, Darren reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He'd come to Vraxis Prime to build infrastructure, to help establish humanity's foothold among the stars. Instead, he'd found something more important. Proof that connection transcends species, that family isn't bound by biology, and that sometimes the most profound relationships begin with the simplest gestures, even if that gesture happens to be biting an alien predator cub. Core bumped his head against Darren's leg, and the human reached down to scratch behind those triangular ears. "Yeah," Darren murmured. "I'm your pack now. God help us both."